The desperate Natasha Rivers stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, her hands trembling as she calculated the impossible mathematics of her situation. 28 years old with a fine arts degree that seemed increasingly worthless. She had exactly $47 in her checking account and rent that was 3 months overdue. Her small Brooklyn studio, cluttered with canvases and art supplies, represented both her dreams and her failures. The email had arrived that morning like an answer to desperate prayers, though it came from an unexpected source. Ms. Rivers, I have a business proposition that could solve your immediate financial concerns. Meet me at La Bernardine tonight at 8. Marcus Sterling. The signature was followed by a phone number and nothing else. Natasha had nearly deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made her Google the name. Marcus Sterling, real estate mogul, tech investor, philanthropist. Photos showed a man in his early 30s, with dark hair and intense blue eyes, always impeccably dressed at charity events and business conferences.
You went with someone like that?
Contact a struggling artist? Desperation won over caution. She borrowed a black dress from her roommate and took the subway to Midtown Manhattan, feeling completely out of place among the restaurant's elegant clientele. When the hostess led her to a corner table, Natasha's breath caught. Marcus Sterling was even more striking in person, tall and broad-shouldered. With an air of quiet authority that seemed to command attention without effort, Ms. Rivers, he stood as she approached, his smile warm but somehow calculating. Thank you for coming on such short notice.
Honestly, Mr. Sterling,
I'm not sure why I'm here, Natasha said. Settling into the plush chair he pulled out for her, your email was rather mysterious. Marcus poured wine from an expensive bottle already waiting at their table. I'll be direct. I need someone to accompany me to various social and business events over the next 3 months. Someone intelligent, attractive, and capable of holding sophisticated conversations. In return, I'm prepared to pay you $50,000, Natasha. Nearly choked on her wine? Excuse me? $50,000 plus expenses for appropriate clothing and accommodations when we travel? All you need to do is play the role of my girlfriend convincingly. Attend galas, business dinners, weekend retreats. Laugh at my jokes, look interested in my conversations, and generally make me appear more approachable to potential business partners. This is insane, Natasha whispered, looking around nervously. Are you asking me to be some kind of escort? Marcus's expression hardened slightly. Nothing like that. This is purely professional theater. Separate hotel rooms? No physical expectations beyond what any couple might display publicly? Perhaps holding hands? A kiss on the cheek for appearances? Natasha studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. Why me? Surely you could find someone through normal channels, or just date someone actual for real. My last relationship ended badly and publicly. Dating authentically right now would complicate business dealings I can't afford to have disrupted. You, however, have no connections to my world. You're beautiful but not recognizable. Your art suggests you understand how to inhabit different personas. The offer hung between them like a lifeline Natasha was afraid to grasp. $50,000 would solve her immediate problems and give her breathing room to focus on her art again. What exactly would this arrangement involve? She heard herself asking. Marcus smiled, and for the first time that evening it seemed completely genuine. Playing the perfect couple 2 weeks later, Natasha stood in front of Marcus's penthouse bathroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green gown he'd had delivered that morning. The transformation still startled her. Professional hair and makeup artists had turned her into someone she barely recognized. Elegant, sophisticated, expensive. The woman in the mirror looked like she belonged in Marcus's world. Ready? His voice came through the door. Natasha felt her stomach flutter with nerves that had nothing to do with their public debut. The charity auction was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and arriving with Marcus felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Photographers snapped pictures as he helped her from the limousine, his hand warm and steady on her lower back. The gesture felt natural, protective, and Natasha found herself leaning slightly into his touch. Remember, Marcus murmured as they walked up the museum steps. We've been dating for 2 months. We met when you were sketching in Central Park, and I stopped to admire your work.
Got it.
Natasha replied, surprised by how easily she slipped into character. And you convinced me to let you buy me coffee, even though I initially said no because you looked too corporate and stuffy. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby socialites turn their heads. Stuffy. I prefer distinguished. Damned. The museum's great hall had been transformed into an elegant auction space. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, where New York's elite sipped champagne and discussed the evening's lots. Natasha felt overwhelmed by the display of wealth, but Marcus's presence beside her provided an anchor. Marcus, darling, a woman in diamonds approached with air kisses. You simply must introduce me to your lovely companion. Vivian, this is Natasha Rivers. Natasha? Vivian Hartwell? She chairs half the cultural institutions in the city. Natasha smiled warmly, letting her artistic background guide the conversation. Mrs. Hartwell, what a beautiful event. I was particularly drawn to the Rothko piece. In Lot 17, Vivian's eyes lit up. You have wonderful taste, dear. Are you a collector? An artist, actually, though I'm afraid my budget doesn't quite stretch to Rothko acquisitions. The conversation flowed naturally, and Natasha noticed Marcus watching her with something like admiration. When Vivian moved on to other guests, he leaned close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. You're a natural at this, he said, his breath warm against her ear. I'm a better actress than I thought, Natasha replied, though she was beginning to wonder if her responses to him were entirely performance. During the auction, Marcus bid successfully on several pieces, including a sculpture that Natasha had admired. When the auctioneer's gavel fell, he squeezed her hand and whispered, "Consider it a gift for your excellent company." Marcus, you can't. I can, and I will. You've already earned it tonight. As they danced later to the string quartet's music, Natasha felt the boundaries of their arrangement beginning to blur. Marcus was an excellent dancer, leading her confidently across the floor, and the way he looked at her made her forget entirely about their business contract. This feels ... double quotes she began, then stopped herself. Real, Marcus finished, his voice low. I know. I wasn't expecting that either. When he walked her to her apartment door that night, there was a moment of awkward hesitation. The evening had felt like a genuine date, but their arrangement had clear boundaries. Thank you for tonight, Natasha said softly. I actually had a wonderful time. Marcus stepped closer, and for a heartbeat, Natasha thought he might kiss her. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. So did I. More wonderful than I've had in a very long time. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Natasha standing in her doorway, wondering what she was getting herself into. Secrets behind the facade 3 weeks into their arrangement. Natasha had settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural. Mornings in her studio working on paintings, afternoons shopping for appropriate attire, or attending etiquette coaching. Sessions Marcus had arranged, evenings at various high society events on his arm. She was getting better at navigating the complex social dynamics of the wealthy elite. And more troubling, she was getting better at pretending their relationship was real. The problem was that it was beginning to feel real. Marcus had proven to be more complex than she'd initially assumed. He was genuinely interested in her art, asking thoughtful questions about her techniques and inspirations. He'd surprised her by having a small gallery space cleared in his penthouse where she could work when she stayed over after late events. And despite their contractual agreement about physical boundaries, the attraction between them was becoming impossible to ignore. You're distracted tonight, Marcus observed as they left a business dinner at an exclusive private club. His hand rested on her lower back as he guided her through the crowded sidewalk, a gesture that had become second nature. Just thinking about a painting I'm working on, Natasha lied. In truth, she'd been thinking about the way he'd looked at her during dinner when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There had been something hungry in his gaze that made her skin feel warm and sensitive. Would you like to come up for a drink? Marcus asked, as their driver pulled up to his building. I have some excellent wine, and you could show me what you've been working on in the studio. Natasha knew she should go home, maintain the professional distance that was becoming increasingly difficult to preserve. Instead, she heard herself saying yes. Marcus's penthouse felt different at night, more intimate with the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He poured them each a glass of wine while Natasha moved to examine the canvas. She'd left on the easel a painting of stormy skies that had been giving her trouble for weeks. It's beautiful, Marcus said, coming to stand behind her, but it feels unfinished. I can't figure out what it's missing, Natasha admitted, acutely aware of his proximity. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. Maybe it needs something unexpected, something that changes the whole composition. Natasha turned to face him and found he was much closer than she'd realized. Close enough to see the flecks of green in his blue eyes, close enough to notice the slight scar near his left temple that somehow made him even more attractive. Marcus, she began, but whatever she'd been about to say was forgotten when he reached up to cup her face with one hand. Tell me to stop, he said quietly, and I will. Instead of speaking, Natasha rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both testing boundaries they'd agreed not to cross. Then Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Natasha felt herself melting against him. Months of suppressed attraction exploded between them as the kiss deepened, became hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natasha saw her own confusion reflected in Marcus's eyes. This complicates things, he said, though he made no move to release her. Everything about this is complicated, Natasha replied, her hands fisted in his shirt. But I don't care anymore. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then kissed her again, this time with clear intention. When he lifted her onto the edge of his desk, scattering papers to the floor, Natasha glimpsed letterhead that made her freeze. Marcus, she said, pulling back. Who is Davidson and Associates? His expression immediately shuddered. Why do you ask? Because I just saw their logo on some papers, and that's the law firm representing my old company in a lawsuit. Marcus stepped back, running his hands through his hair. Natasha, I can explain. Explain what? Why you have legal documents about Meridian Marketing on your desk. The company I worked for until 6 months ago, when they laid off half their staff. It's not what you think. But looking at the scattered papers, Natasha was beginning to understand exactly what it was. And the realization made her feel sick. The truth unveiled, Nada stared at the legal documents scattered across Marcus's desk, her hands shaking as she read familiar names and dates. Meridian Marketing, her former employer, was being investigated for embezzling funds from their nonprofit clients. And Marcus Sterling wasn't just a wealthy businessman looking for arm candy. He was the lead investor in the firm conducting the investigation. How long have you known? She asked quietly, not looking at him. Marcus moved carefully as if approaching a wounded animal. Natasha, let me explain how long. Her voice was sharp now, cutting through his attempt at diplomacy. From the beginning, he admitted, I knew you worked at Meridian. I knew you were laid off just before the investigation started. I thought you might have information that could help. Natasha felt the blood drain from her face. You thought I was involved? That's why you hired me? Not because you needed a fake girlfriend, but because you wanted to get close to someone you suspected of corporate fraud. Initially, yes, but that's not God. I'm such an idiot. Natasha started gathering her purse, her movements jerky with anger and humiliation. All those questions about my work, about my former colleagues. You weren't being interested in my life. You were interrogating me. Marcus reached for her arm. Well, that's not true. Yes, I had suspicions at first, but within a week I knew you weren't involved. You're terrible at hiding your emotions, Natasha. If you'd been embezzling money, I would have seen it immediately. She jerked away from his touch. So then what? You just decided to keep lying to me for fun? String along the poor, desperate artist who was stupid enough to think this was becoming real? It did become real. Marcus's voice rose, his careful composure finally cracking. Everything between us became real. That's why I couldn't tell you the truth. I was terrified of losing what we'd found together. Natasha laughed bitterly. We haven't found anything together. This entire relationship has been built on deception. You've been lying to me about who you are and why you wanted me here from day one. And what about you? Marcus demanded. Have you been completely honest? Have you told me about the $20,000 your former boss asked you to transfer to an overseas account 3 days before you were laid off? Natasha went very still. How do you know about that? Because it's my job to know. That transfer is part of the evidence trail we've been following for months. I had no idea what it was for, Natasha said, her voice barely a whisper. Janet said it was for an international client payment. She asked me to handle it because their usual processor was out sick. I know that now, but for weeks you were our primary suspect. The words hit Natasha like physical blows. All those intimate dinners, passionate kisses, moments when she'd felt truly understood and desired all of it, had been a lie designed to extract information from someone he'd believed was a criminal. I need to leave, she said, moving toward the door. Natasha, please. Let's talk about this. What we have is real, regardless of how it started. She turned back to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. What we have is a business arrangement, and I'm terminating my contract. The investigation is over. Meridian's CFO has been arrested, and we have all the evidence we need. Your name has been completely cleared. This doesn't have to change anything between us. It changes everything, Natasha said firmly. Every time you touch me, every time you tell me you care about me, I'll wonder if you're just making sure I don't become a liability to your case. That's not fair. Fair. Natasha's voice broke. You want to talk about fair? I was falling in love with you, Marcus. Actually falling in love with a man who saw me as nothing more than a potential criminal to be manipulated. The confession hung between them like a wounded thing. Akus took a step toward her, his face showing pain that looked genuine. I'm in love with you too, he said quietly. That's what makes this so complicated. No, Natasha said, backing toward the door. Love doesn't start with deception. Whatever this is between us, it's not love. It's just another performance, and I'm done playing my part. She was gone before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone. In his penthouse, with the scattered evidence of both his investigation and his broken relationship. Love beyond the contract 2 weeks after Natasha walked out of Marcus's life. She was finally beginning to feel like herself again. The $50,000 he deposited in her account remained untouched. She couldn't bring herself to spend money that felt tainted by deception. Instead, she'd picked up freelance design work and was slowly getting back on her feet the honest way. She was working late in her studio when the frantic knocking started. Natasha opened the door expecting her neighbor, but instead found a woman she recognized from one of the charity events, Helen Morrison, Marcus's business partner. Natasha, thank God you're here, Helen said, pushing past her into the apartment. We need to talk. You're in danger. What are you talking about? Helen closed the door and engaged both locks. Janet Russell, Meridian's CFO, made bail yesterday. She knows you were the one who unwittingly processed the transfer that led to her arrest. She blames you for everything. Natasha sank onto her couch, feeling suddenly cold. How do you know this? Because she called Marcus this morning. Threatened to make sure you paid for ruining her life before she disappears. Marcus has been trying to reach you all day. My phone's been off, Natasha admitted. I didn't want to talk to him.
Duh.
Well, you need to talk to him now. He's been working with the FBI to set up protection for you, but you disappeared. Do you have any idea how worried he's been? As if summoned by her words, Natasha heard familiar footsteps on the stairs outside. Marcus appeared in her doorway moments later, looking haggard and desperate. Thank God, he said, relief evident in every line of his body. Helen, did you? Tell her I told her? But maybe you should explain why you've been camped outside her building for the past 6 hours. Natasha looked between them, confused. You've been watching my apartment? Marcus stepped inside, his movements careful and controlled. Janet Russell has been asking questions about you. Where you live, where you work, what your routine is. The FBI thinks she might try to hurt you before she flees the country.
Oh.
This is all because of your investigation, Natasha said accusingly. If you hadn't dragged me into this, if I hadn't dragged you into this, you'd still be a suspect. Marcus interrupted. and you'd be facing jail time instead of just being threatened by someone else who's going to prison. The truth of that statement hit Natasha hard. Whatever Marcus's initial motives, his investigation had ultimately cleared her name and uncovered the real criminals. There's something else, Helen said quietly. Marcus refused FBI protection for himself. Aset E insisted all resources go to keeping you safe. Natasha looked at Marcus in surprise. Why would you need protection? Because I'm the one who built the case against her, Marcus said simply. But you're the one she blames. And you double quotes, he paused, his voice growing rough with emotion. You're the one I can't live without. Before Natasha could respond, the lights in her apartment went out. In the darkness, she heard Helen curse softly, and Marcus move quickly to the window. Someone cut the power to the building, he said quietly. We need to leave now. As they made their way carefully down the dark stairwell, Natasha found herself pressed close to Marcus's side, his arm protectively around her waist. Whatever anger and hurt she'd been carrying seemed less important than the immediate danger they faced together. In the lobby, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. FBI's here, he said with relief. They're going to a safe house until they can apprehend Russell. Hours later, in a nondescript hotel room with federal agents stationed outside, Natasha finally had the conversation she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. I'm sorry, Marcus said simply. For lying to you, for using you, for making you fall in love with someone who wasn't entirely real. But some of it was real, Natasha said slowly. The way you looked at my paintings, the conversations we had. About art and life, the way you made me feel when we danced, that wasn't all pretense, was it? None of that was pretense. It's the man who fell in love with your passion and talent and stubborn independence. That was the real me. The investigation was my job, but loving you was never part of the plan. Natasha studied his face in the dim hotel lighting. What happens after this is over? After Janet Russell is caught and the danger passes? That depends on you, Marcus said quietly. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm hoping you might consider starting over. No contracts, no deception, no hidden agendas. Just to people who found something unexpected and want to see where it leads. Outside, they could hear the sound of police sirens growing closer. Somewhere in the city, the woman who had threatened their lives was being hunted down. But in their small, protected space, Natasha reached for Marcus's hand. I'd like that, she said softly. But this time, we do it honestly. No secrets, no lies, no matter how complicated the truth might be. Marcus brought her hand to his lips, kissing her palm gently. Agreed. Though I should warn you, the truth is that I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you. Natasha smiled for the first time in weeks. Funny, that's exactly the truth I was hoping to hear. When they kissed this time, there were no contracts between them, no hidden motives or professional obligations. Just two people who had found their way to authentic love despite the deception that had brought them together.